It was 6:30 on a Sunday morning when a loud crunch jolted me out of bed. You know that sound, metal meeting wood, tires screeching, the kind that instantly tells you something bad just happened. I ran outside in my slippers, half asleep and half panicking. And what do I see? A silver BMW, nose deep in my front fence. My once perfect wooden fence was now splintered like matchsticks, and the driver's airbag had deployed. And who steps out of the car? None other than Karen's son, the same 20-something guy I'd seen speeding around the neighborhood like he was in a Fast and Furious movie. Now, before we go any further, let me introduce you to Karen, or as we like to call her around the neighborhood, the self-appointed queen of the HOA. You probably know the type. Every community's got one. That one person who seems to believe the entire neighborhood exists solely for them to supervise. Yeah, that's her. Karen isn't just on the HOA board. Oh no. She is the HOA board, at least in her mind. She walks around with a clipboard like it's a royal scepter, inspecting lawns, peeking over fences, and snapping pictures of people's mailboxes if they're the wrong shade of beige. If you've ever seen someone squinting at your yard from behind a pair of oversized sunglasses while pretending to walk their dog, there's a good chance it's someone like her. Her motto: if it's not in the handbook, it's a violation. Karen's the kind of person who'll send you a letter, not a text, not an email, a formal letter, because your trash can was visible for 3 minutes past collection time. And she always signs off with that fake politeness. Warm regards, Karen, HOA Vice President, acting president while we're between elections. Between elections? Yeah, right. She's been acting president for 3 years now. No one else wants the job because dealing with her is like applying for a full-time job in frustration. She once measured my grass height with a ruler. I'm not kidding. I saw her crouched on my lawn in broad daylight, ruler in one hand, HOA handbook in the other, muttering something about half an inch over regulation. When I asked her what she was doing, she straightened up and said, "Just ensuring neighborhood consistency." Consistency. That's Karen's favorite word, right next to violation. Now, Karen's not just controlling, she's dramatic. Every small issue is an emergency worthy of a committee meeting. Someone parked their car facing the wrong direction? Emergency HOA meeting. Someone painted their front door a slightly warmer shade of white. Emergency HOA meeting. Someone left Christmas lights up until January 2nd? You guessed it, emergency HOA meeting. And when she calls those meetings, she expects everyone to show up, take notes, and treat her like the mayor of a small town. She even brings snacks, but only for herself. Last month, she brought a Tupperware container full of celery sticks, then made a speech about how snacks at HOA meetings promote disorder. Karen's house is spotless, like disturbingly spotless. Perfectly trimmed hedges, a driveway you could eat off of, and one of those welcome mats that she clearly doesn't mean. Her front porch has matching flower pots that are replaced seasonally, fall mums, spring tulips, summer petunias, all color coordinated with her shutters. If there's even a single leaf out of place, she's out there with her leaf blower at 6 a.m., wearing noise-canceling headphones and a determined expression, like she's single-handedly defending the neighborhood from chaos. But here's the thing. For all her obsession with order, she can't seem to control the one person who causes 90% of the actual problems around here. Her son, Kyle. Now, Kyle is well. Imagine if entitlement had a driver's license. That's Kyle. Early 20s, still living at home. Spends most of his time working on his music, which is code for revving his car engine in the driveway and blasting bass so loud it rattles mailboxes 3 streets away. Karen treats him like a prodigy, her little angel who just needs people to understand him. Meanwhile, Kyle's main accomplishments include getting banned from the community pool for vaping in the shallow end and turning the HOA clubhouse parking lot into his personal racetrack. He drives this silver BMW, loud exhaust, tinted windows, and the kind of custom rims that scream I'm compensating for something. Every time he speeds down the street, you can hear the engine echo between the houses like a thunderstorm of bad decisions. Once, he almost hit a squirrel. You'd think that would humble him, but nope, he blamed the squirrel for not staying in its lane. And the best part? Whenever he gets caught doing something stupid, Karen swoops in to defend him like a lawyer in a courtroom drama. He's just a passionate driver. He's expressing himself. He's misunderstood. Yeah, sure, Karen. He's misunderstood, by physics, mostly. There was one time he did donuts in the HOA parking lot, leaving massive skid marks all over the asphalt. Everyone saw it. There's even camera footage. But when people brought it up at the next HOA meeting, Karen stood up, all righteous, and said, "My son would never do something so reckless. His tires are just faulty." Faulty. As in, the tires accidentally spun in perfect circles, while screeching like banshees for a full minute. Faulty tires. You can't make this stuff up. The thing is, everyone in the neighborhood knows Karen protects Kyle from consequences, like it's her full-time job. If he's blasting music at midnight, and someone complains, she shows up at your door, with her clipboard. "Did you file a noise complaint? Because my son was practicing his music." We should support young talent. If he parks halfway across your driveway, she'll tell you that it's only temporary. Even if temporary, somehow lasts 3 hours. If he drops empty energy drink cans in your yard, she insists they must have blown over in the wind. To her, Kyle can do no wrong. And anyone who says otherwise, clearly, they're just jealous, bitter, or against community harmony. It's gotten to the point where neighbors have an unspoken agreement. Avoid Karen at all costs. If you see her walking your way, you suddenly remember you left something in your car. If she's standing outside with that clipboard, everyone mysteriously decides it's a great time to mow their lawns, with ear protection on. Even the mailman avoids her. He literally skips her house on his route and comes back at the end when he's emotionally prepared. I'll admit, part of me used to find it funny. Watching her march around, micromanaging people's lives like a suburban dictator, was kind of entertaining. Like a reality show that never ends. But then, every once in a while, she crosses that line, from mildly annoying to downright unbelievable. Like the time she told my wife that our garden gnome, a tiny, smiling gnome holding a lantern, was offensive to community aesthetics. Offensive. It wasn't political, it wasn't weird. It was literally just a gnome. But apparently, it clashed with the visual theme of the neighborhood. She even threatened to fine us if we didn't remove it. I told her, "Karen, it's a gnome, not a neon sign." She didn't even blink. She just wrote something on her clipboard and said, "We'll see about that." Spoiler, we kept the gnome. And every time she walks by, I swear it feels like that little statue is smirking at her. So, that's Karen, the woman who polices people's paint colors, times how long your sprinklers run, and once wrote a 3-page email because someone hummed wind chimes that disrupted the auditory peace of the cul-de-sac. And then there's Kyle, the loud, reckless, spoiled son who somehow thinks rules don't apply to him because mom will always bail him out. They're the ultimate HOA duo, the enforcer and the offender. One believes she's keeping the neighborhood perfect. The other's the reason it never will be. So when I tell you that Karen's son is the one who crashed his car into my fence and then tried to blame me for it, you can understand why I wasn't exactly shocked. Because if there's one thing I've learned living next to these two, it's this. With Karen and Kyle, logic always takes a back seat, usually right before the crash. So there we were, me, my broken fence, and Kyle standing there like a scene straight out of a bad sitcom. My heart was still pounding from being jolted awake by the sound of his car plowing through my fence, and I'm staring at the wreckage thinking, how in the world did this kid manage to do this at 6:30 in the morning? The car, a silver BMW that probably cost more than my yearly property taxes, was nose deep in my yard, smoke curling from the hood. My fence, which I had just stained and sealed 2 weeks earlier, was in pieces. Boards were scattered like toothpicks across the grass, and one section was still hanging off the car's bumper like a trophy. Kyle stepped out of the car, rubbing his neck dramatically, acting like he was the victim here. He had that look. The one people get when they've clearly done something wrong, but are already rehearsing excuses in their heads. He glanced at the fence, then at me, squinting like he couldn't quite figure out how my fence had the audacity to exist in front of a speeding car. "Dude," he finally said, his voice scratchy like he'd just woken up, "you should really fix your fence. It's way too close to the road." I blinked at him. I thought maybe he hit his head harder than I thought. "Excuse me," I said. My fence is 3 feet inside my property line. It's exactly where it's supposed to be. He shrugged. That casual kind of shrug only people who've never been held accountable can pull off. Well, I lost control. So technically, it's kind of your fault. You should have built it further back. There was a long, painful silence, the kind where your brain needs a moment to process just how absurd the words you just heard are. I looked at him, then at the mangled fence, then back at him. So, let me get this straight, I said slowly. You drove your car off the road, into my yard, and you're saying it's my fault for putting my fence too close to the road? Exactly, he said, like it was the most logical thing in the world. That's when it hit me. This wasn't just any kind of stupid. This was Karen brand stupid. The kind that only grows when it's been watered daily with entitlement and zero consequences. I sighed, trying to keep my cool. Kyle, the road's right there, I said, pointing. There's a sidewalk, a curb, a strip of grass, and then my fence. You would have had to jump the curb and drive 15 feet off the road to hit this thing. He stared at the ground, kicking a broken fence post with his shoe. Yeah, well, it's still kind of your fault. I was only going like 40. 40. I nearly choked. This is a 25 zone. You were speeding through a residential neighborhood at 40 miles per hour. He raised his hands defensively. Hey, it's early. No one was out. I swear I felt a vein in my forehead pop. I took a deep breath, trying to remind myself that this kid's brain probably hadn't fully loaded yet. You realize that's not how it works, right? You hit my fence. That's on you. But Kyle just smirked. That smug little half-grin that only comes from being told your whole life that you're special. Well, my mom's on the HOA, he said. She's gonna say your fence shouldn't even be here. Oh, great. That was the moment my stomach dropped, because I knew exactly what that meant. Karen. And as if the universe decided to prove my point instantly, I heard the familiar sound of slippers smacking the pavement. Flap, 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 growing louder and faster. I looked up and there she was. Karen, in all her glory, marching down the street like a suburban general heading into battle. Robe tied tight, hair in curlers, clutching a mug that probably said something like, #1HOA president. She had that same expression she always wore, the kind that made you feel like you'd already lost an argument you hadn't even started yet. What happened here? She shouted before she even reached us. Her voice carried through the whole cul-de-sac, instantly alerting half the neighborhood. Curtains moved. Front doors cracked open. People peeked out to see what the latest HOA drama was about. Kyle perked up, pointing at me like a 5-year-old tattling to his mom. He put his fence too close to the road. I lost control, and it's kind of his fault. Karen stopped dead in her tracks, gasped, then looked at me like I'd personally insulted her ancestors. You what? You put your fence too close to the road. I stared at her. It's inside my property line, Karen. 3 feet inside. She crossed her arms. That's not what the HOA guidelines say. I raised an eyebrow. Karen, the HOA doesn't control property lines. That's a city regulation. Oh, I think you'll find, she said, pulling her robe tighter, that the HOA can override some city standards when it comes to neighborhood aesthetics. There it was, the word. Aesthetics. The battle cry of every HOA Karen in the country. I gestured toward the destroyed fence. What's aesthetically pleasing about a BMW sticking out of my yard? She ignored me and turned to her son, her tone softening instantly. Are you okay, sweetheart? Did this man's fence hurt you? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Did his what? I sputtered. The fence hurt him. Kyle nodded solemnly. It came out of nowhere. Out of nowhere. I said, it's a fence. It's been here for years. It didn't move. Karen gave me that tight-lipped smile that always preceded one of her legendary passive-aggressive lectures. You know, I've been meaning to talk to you about that fence. It doesn't exactly match the community's approved color palette. I ran my hand over my face. Karen, it's brown. It's a fence. What color is it supposed to be? Neutral beige, she said matter-of-factly. Natural wood tones can sometimes disrupt the visual harmony of the street. Visual harmony, I repeated slowly, like I was translating it from nonsense to English. Meanwhile, Kyle leaned against the car, scrolling on his phone like nothing happened, completely oblivious to the fact that his car was still leaking coolant all over my grass. I tried again, reasoning with her. Look, Karen, your son drove off the road, into my yard, and through my fence. This isn't about aesthetics, it's about accountability. Karen sniffed, clutching her coffee cup tighter. Well, we'll just see what the police have to say about that. I'm sure once they realize your fence violates HOA proximity standards. It doesn't. I interrupted. It's approved by the city. I have the permits. She tilted her head with that condescending smirk that said she didn't care what proof I had. You can say that, but unless you have documentation. Oh, I do, I said, cutting her off. In fact, I have copies in my house right now. That seemed to throw her off for a second, but only briefly. Well, she said, her tone snapping back to that fake sweet one. I suppose we'll just let the authorities handle it. She turned back to Kyle. Don't worry, honey. He's responsible for all of this. You shouldn't have to suffer because someone can't follow neighborhood guidelines. Kyle nodded, still scrolling, mumbling. Yeah, this guy's fence came out of nowhere. I wanted to laugh, but I was too busy trying not to explode. My fence was destroyed, my lawn was wrecked, and I was somehow the villain in their story. By now, a few neighbors had come out to watch. One of them even brought coffee like it was Sunday morning entertainment. You could see them whispering, shaking their heads. Everyone in this neighborhood knew how Karen operated. They'd all been on the receiving end of her friendly reminders at one point or another. Should we call someone? One of them asked quietly. Oh, don't worry, I said, my voice steady. I already did. Karen's head snapped toward me. You called the police? I smiled. Yep. Her face froze for a second, that confident, smug mask slipping just a little. Well, she said stiffly, I'm sure they'll see reason once they understand the situation. I nodded. Oh, I'm counting on it. Because deep down, I already knew. When the cops showed up and saw this mess, they weren't going to buy a single word of her nonsense. And something told me this was going to be one of those mornings where karma clocked in early. Karen starts yelling before she even reaches us. I swear, I could hear her from half a block away. That shrill, high-pitched tone that could cut through glass and ruin a perfectly peaceful morning. It was the sound every homeowner in our neighborhood had learned to dread. If her voice had a ringtone, it'd be labeled incoming trouble. What did you do to my son's car? She screamed, her voice echoing down the quiet street, like a police siren powered by pure indignation. I turned slowly, almost in disbelief. There she was, Karen, marching toward us with her robe flapping like a battle flag. She had curlers still in her hair, slippers on her feet, and a steaming mug of coffee in her hand. It was like watching a suburban general storming the battlefield, caffeine-fueled and ready for war. She didn't even glance at the wrecked fence. Her eyes went straight to her precious son's BMW, the one currently half buried in my yard, as if it were some tragic monument to injustice. Your son did this to my fence, I said, pointing at the wreckage. I was calm, or at least trying to be. He came flying down the road, lost control, and crashed into my property. Karen gasped loudly, the kind of gasp usually reserved for soap opera betrayals. No, she snapped. Your fence is a hazard. The HOA has told you multiple times it doesn't meet community standards. Now, let's get one thing straight. She had never said anything about my fence. Not in an email, not in a meeting, not even one of her passive-aggressive flyers about neighborhood unity. This was all straight from the land of make-believe, where Karen ruled supreme. I took a deep breath. Karen, no one from the HOA has ever. Oh, please, she interrupted, waving her hand like I was some child who needed correction. We've discussed this many times in board meetings. Your fence doesn't match the approved design. It's too high, too dark, and frankly, it clashes with the neighborhood's overall aesthetic. I gestured toward the mangled wooden boards now scattered across my lawn. It's not clashing with anything anymore, Karen. Your son took care of that. For a split second, her jaw dropped, then, as always, she recovered, switching into her favorite defense mechanism, blame shifting. She turned to Kyle, who was standing beside his wrecked car like a sulking toddler who'd been denied dessert. "Don't worry, honey," she said soothingly. "We'll make him pay for the damages." Kyle nodded, smirking. Yeah, his fence shouldn't have been there anyway. That was it. That was the moment I realized we weren't in the real world anymore. We'd entered Karen logic, a magical place where facts don't matter, personal responsibility doesn't exist, and her family is always right. "Excuse me," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "You think I'm going to pay for your son's damages?" Karen folded her arms. "Well, of course. You built your fence too close to the road. It's basically entrapment." "Entrapment?" I repeated, my brain short-circuiting. "Karen, my fence is on my property. You can't just drive into something and call it a trap." "It's unsafe," she said. "The HOA has very clear visibility guidelines. It's a danger to the community." "Then maybe your son shouldn't be speeding through the community at 40 miles an hour." I shot back. Her eyes widened, scandalized. "Don't raise your voice at me." "Oh, I'm sorry," I said, sarcasm dripping off every word. "I forgot I'm supposed to whisper while standing in a crime scene that your son caused." Karen took a step closer, lowering her voice into that condescending tone she probably practiced in the mirror. "Look," she said, "I'm trying to be reasonable. If you take down what's left of this fence and replace it with an approved model, maybe we can avoid filing a formal complaint." "A formal complaint?" I said, almost laughing. "Karen, your son just caused thousands of dollars in property damage, and you're threatening me with an HOA complaint?" She blinked, like that concept didn't compute. "Well, yes. The board has to maintain standards." "Standards?" I said, throwing my arms up. "Your son's car is literally inside my yard." By now, the commotion had drawn an audience. A few of my neighbors were peeking from behind their blinds, and Mr. Thompson from across the street had come out in his robe, holding his morning paper and grinning like he'd just gotten front-row tickets to a drama he didn't have to pay for. Karen noticed the onlookers and immediately straightened her robe, lowering her voice but somehow making it even more dramatic. "This doesn't concern you folks," she said, addressing the neighbors without looking at them. "It's a private matter." "Private?" I said. "You're yelling in the middle of the street, Karen." She ignored me. "Kyle, sweetie, are you okay? Do you need to go to urgent care? Maybe you have whiplash." Kyle groaned, rubbing his neck again for emphasis. "Yeah, maybe. My back kind of hurts." I rolled my eyes. "Oh, come on. He walked out of the car just fine." Karen spun toward me, finger pointing like a weapon. "Are you a doctor now? Because unless you have a medical license, you don't get to decide if my son's injured." "I'm also not the one who drove a car through someone's fence," I said deadpan. "So maybe I get to decide who's at fault." She gasped again, clutching her chest dramatically. "You're being hostile. I don't appreciate your tone." "Karen," I said, trying not to lose it. "I'm standing in my own yard surrounded by broken boards, tire tracks, and your son's car fluids. I think I've earned the right to be hostile." She turned her attention back to her son, her voice soft and syrupy again. "Don't worry, baby. We'll take care of this. We'll have the HOA handle it. He's been difficult before." "I've been difficult," I said. "All I've done is plant flowers and mind my own business." "Oh, don't play innocent," she said. "You remember the Halloween decorations incident? The one where you said my pumpkins were too scary for children?" I asked. "Karen, they were pumpkins, not horror props." "They had faces," she shot back, "and one of them had a frown. That's aggressive." I couldn't help it, I laughed. A short, disbelieving laugh that only made her angrier. She stomped her slippered foot, sloshing coffee onto her robe. "This isn't funny. My son's property has been damaged because of your negligence." "Negligence?" I repeated. "You mean because I dare to have a fence on my own property?" "You'll be hearing from our HOA attorney," she declared triumphantly. And that's when I decided, nope, enough was enough. I pulled my phone out of my pocket and started dialing. She noticed immediately. "What do you think you're doing?" she demanded. "Calling the police," I said. Her eyes went wide. "You can't do that." Oh, I absolutely can, I said calmly. He crashed on my property, destroyed my fence, and now you're threatening to sue me for it. Yeah, I think the cops should hear this one. Karen took a step back, sputtering. You can't call the police on me. I'm on the HOA board. That's not a badge, Karen, I said. It's a clipboard. Kyle groaned again, mumbling something about how this was all so unfair. I ignored him and pressed call. Karen started pacing in circles, muttering to herself. Unbelievable. The lack of respect. The attitude. I try to maintain this community's image, and this is what I get. Oh, don't worry, I said. You'll get something all right, probably an insurance claim. She glared at me, finger trembling like she wanted to wag in my face, but wasn't sure if that was a good idea with an audience watching. You're making a huge mistake, she hissed. The HOA doesn't take kindly to people who go rogue. I smiled. Good thing the police outranked the HOA. By the time the dispatcher picked up, I could hear the faint sound of sirens in the distance. A couple more neighbors had come outside, phones in hand, recording just in case things got interesting. Karen was pacing and muttering about bylaws. Kyle was sitting on the curb, pretending to be injured but still scrolling through his phone. And me? I was done. Because if there's one thing I've learned living in a neighborhood run by Karen, it's that logic and reason don't work, but accountability does. And in about 10 minutes, accountability was going to arrive in a squad car. The police arrived about 10 minutes later, though honestly, it felt like an eternity. In that short time, Karen managed to lecture me about community respect, call 2 of her fellow HOA board members, and start writing something down in a notebook that I'm pretty sure was just for show. When those red and blue lights finally turned the corner, I swear I heard angels singing. A black and white cruiser rolled up slowly, and 2 officers stepped out, one tall and serious, the other with the kind of calm, slightly amused expression that said he'd seen this kind of nonsense before. You could tell instantly these guys were veterans of neighborhood drama. The tall one, Officer Daniels, surveyed the scene with a deep sigh that said, "Yep, it's one of those mornings." The second, Officer Miller, adjusted his hat and muttered something like, "Well, this should be interesting." Karen, of course, immediately sprang into action. She practically sprinted toward them, robe flapping, coffee mug in hand like a lawyer rushing to deliver her opening statement. Officers, thank goodness you're here," she said, waving her arms dramatically. "This man," she pointed straight at me like she was identifying a criminal in a lineup, "has built a dangerous, non-compliant fence that caused my son's terrible accident." Daniels blinked slowly. "Ma'am, you're saying his fence caused the accident?" "Yes," she said, as though she was revealing the smoking gun. "It's far too close to the road, and it's not HOA approved. The board has repeatedly expressed concerns about it." I crossed my arms, trying not to smirk. "That's funny, Karen, because this is the first I've ever heard of it." Karen ignored me completely. My son could have been seriously injured. His car is ruined because of this man's negligence. Daniels nodded slowly, clearly trying to process the avalanche of nonsense. "Okay," he said calmly, pulling out a small notebook. "Let's start from the beginning." "Sir," he said, turning to me. "You're the homeowner?" "Yep," I said. "And this is my property, all of it, including the fence that used to be right there before his son decided to use it as a brake system." That earned a small chuckle from Officer Miller, though he quickly hid it behind his notepad. Daniels looked around, taking in the scene, the splintered boards, the deep tire marks cutting through the grass, and the BMW with its bumper hanging off like a loose tooth. "All right," he said, turning to Kyle. "You're the driver, correct?" Kyle crossed his arms, slouching like a kid caught cheating on a test. "Yeah, but the fence shouldn't be that close." I had to bite my tongue not to laugh. Daniels blinked. "You drove off the road and hit a stationary fence." Kyle nodded. "Yeah, but it's kinda his fault. He should have put it further back." Daniel stared at him for a long moment, then turned his gaze toward me, probably checking if he was being pranked. When he realized this was serious, he sighed, the kind of long, weary sigh only a cop who's dealt with a dozen HOA complaints in 1 week can produce. Before Daniels could even respond, Karen jumped in again. And it's not just the fence, she said, her voice rising. It's non-compliant with HOA standards. We've had issues with him before. His lawn gnome, his mailbox, and now this. It's clear negligence. Officer Miller actually coughed to hide a laugh. Daniels turned back to Karen, his patience already thinning. Ma'am, we're not here about HOA issues. We're here about a traffic collision. From what I can see, your son drove off the road and hit private property. Karen blinked, clearly not expecting him to just dismiss her like that. Well, yes, but the HOA has very specific regulations about fence placement. Ma'am, Daniels interrupted, the HOA doesn't override city property laws. The look on Karen's face was priceless. You could practically see her brain buffering, trying to load a comeback. Well, she finally sputtered, I'm on the HOA board. Daniels didn't even blink. Good for you, ma'am. But the HOA doesn't dictate traffic law or property boundaries. You could hear the collective "oh" from the small audience of neighbors that had now gathered along the sidewalk, pretending to walk their dogs or check the mail, while clearly enjoying the show. Karen's eyes darted around, realizing she was losing control of the narrative. She straightened her robe like a cape and tried again. But his fence doesn't meet our aesthetic standards. Daniels raised an eyebrow. Aesthetic standards? Yes, she said, waving her hands for emphasis. We have a very consistent look in this neighborhood. Uniform fences, approved color palettes, proper spacing. Officer Miller cut in, deadpan. Ma'am, is there a law against being ugly? The neighbors snickered. Karen gasped, scandalized. Excuse me. That's highly inappropriate. Daniels shot Miller a look, but I could see the corner of his mouth twitching, fighting off a smile. All right, everyone, he said, regaining control. Let's stay focused. He turned to Kyle again. So, son, walk me through this. You were driving, and what happened? Kyle shrugged. I was just heading home, and then I saw a squirrel or something, so I swerved, and the fence was just right there. Right there. Daniels repeated. At the edge of private property? Yeah, Kyle said, nodding confidently. So you swerved off the road, Daniels clarified. Over the curb, across the grass, and into the fence because of a squirrel? Kyle hesitated, realizing how ridiculous it sounded. Oh yeah. Daniels sighed again and scribbled something in his notebook. All right. And how fast were you going? Kyle looked away. I don't know. Maybe 20. Karen immediately jumped in. He's a very safe driver. Everyone says so. Miller walked a few feet away, inspecting the skid marks. 20, he said, crouching down. Ma'am, these skid marks are nearly 20 feet long. You don't get those at 20 miles an hour. Karen opened her mouth, closed it, then opened it again like a fish out of water. Well, maybe his tires slipped. On dry asphalt? Miller asked. She blinked. It was humid. That did it. I couldn't hold it in anymore, I laughed. Not a polite chuckle, but a full, honest, I can't believe this is real laugh. Daniels turned toward me, trying to stay professional. Sir, we're going to need you to fill out a property damage report. Do you have proof of ownership of the fence? Yep, I said, already pulling out the folder I kept for situations exactly like this. Permits, receipts, city approval, the works. Karen's eyes widened as I handed the officer a perfectly organized stack of paperwork. She wasn't expecting that. See, I said, all legal, all approved, all mine. Daniels flipped through the papers, nodding. Looks good to me. City-approved fencing, proper setback distance, meets all safety codes. Then he looked at Karen. Ma'am, just to clarify, the HOA doesn't have the authority to enforce city code or alter property lines. Your son is at fault for striking private property. Karen's mouth opened, but nothing came out. For once, she was speechless. I swear, if you'd listened closely, you could have heard the faint hum of Karma purring like a happy cat. Still, Karen wasn't done. She took a deep breath, clutching her coffee mug like a stressed ball. Well, she said, her tone icy, we'll be contacting our lawyer. I'm sure once this goes through the HOA legal committee, they'll see reason. Miller raised an eyebrow. Ma'am, I'm not sure the HOA has a legal committee that deals with car crashes. She sniffed. We have very strict procedures. Daniels closed his notebook. Here's the procedure today. Your son gets a citation for reckless driving and property damage. You'll need to contact your insurance company to cover the cost of repairs to his property. Karen blinked. Insurance? Yes, ma'am. Daniels said patiently. That's typically how these things work. But, she stammered. He's traumatized. You can't give him a ticket. Daniels didn't even flinch. Ma'am, the fence is the victim here. The neighbors laughed again. Someone even clapped quietly. Karen's face turned bright red. This isn't over, she snapped. Daniels nodded. You're right. You still have to call a tow truck. And that's when I knew. Oh, this was about to get really, really good. As the officers took our statements, the atmosphere began to shift. You could feel the tension simmering in the air. That strange quiet before something really entertaining happens. Officer Daniels leaned against the hood of the squad car, clipboard in hand, while Officer Miller walked over to the patrol computer. He slid Kyle's license and registration through the reader with the casual rhythm of a man who'd done this 1,000 times. Karen was still in the middle of her ongoing performance, pacing back and forth on the curb in her bathrobe, coffee mug still clutched in hand like a gavel of suburban justice. You'll see, she was saying, voice high and trembling with forced confidence. Once my lawyer hears about this, and once the HOA reviews it, there will be serious consequences. I leaned against my shattered fence, arms folded, pretending to look at my phone but really just watching the slow-motion car crash of denial unfold. I could tell the officers were already tired, not from the crash, but from Karen. You could see it in their eyes. Then it happened. Officer Miller, who'd been quietly typing into the system, froze mid-keystroke. His brow furrowed. He tilted his head slightly, then glanced at the screen again as if it had just told him the ending of a movie he didn't expect. Slowly, he turned toward Kyle. Sir, he said in that calm, steady tone that cops use when they're about to drop a truth bomb. Your insurance expired 2 months ago. It was like the world itself went silent. The birds stopped chirping. The wind paused. Even Karen froze mid-gesture, one hand raised dramatically like she was about to deliver a monologue. What? She finally gasped. No, that can't be. I pay it every year. Miller glanced back at the screen and shook his head. According to our system, the policy lapsed 63 days ago. That means you're currently driving uninsured. If silence were a sound, it would have been deafening. The air between us turned thick. I swear, if this moment had a soundtrack, it would have been that slow, dramatic bwam from a movie trailer. You know, the kind that plays right before the title card flashes on screen. Karen blinked rapidly, her perfectly plucked eyebrows furrowing in disbelief. There must be a mistake. I set everything up on autopay. I've never missed a payment in my life. Officer Miller stayed perfectly professional, though I could tell he'd heard that line before. Well, ma'am, sometimes policies don't auto-renew if there's a change in the vehicle, address, or payment method. But right now it shows inactive. No insurance coverage, no active policy number. Karen turned to her son, her robe flaring dramatically in the breeze. Kyle, she hissed. You told me you renewed it. Kyle, who had been leaning against the crushed BMW trying to look cool and disinterested, suddenly looked like a kid caught with his hand in the cookie jar. I was gonna, he mumbled, scratching the back of his neck. I just forgot. You forgot, Karen screeched, her voice jumping 2 octaves higher. You had one responsibility, Kyle. One. I could feel every neighbor's head poking out, just a little further from their curtains. Oh, they were loving this. We were practically the morning entertainment. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked, like it was cheering me on. Officer Daniels wrote something down on his notepad, glanced up, and asked, So, just to confirm, you're aware that driving without insurance is illegal in this state, right? Kyle stammered. Well, yeah, but I thought I had a grace period or something. Miller's mouth twitched, that half-smile cops get when someone says something spectacularly dumb. A grace period doesn't cover 2 months, son. Karen's face went from pale to red in about 5 seconds flat. She turned toward the officers, desperate to reclaim control of the situation. This is ridiculous. He's a good boy. He's never been in trouble. This is an honest mistake. Daniels nodded politely, but didn't budge. Ma'am, I understand, but the law is the law. Driving without insurance is a serious violation. I don't know what came over me, but I swear, I had to bite my tongue to keep from grinning. I mean, karma doesn't usually hit this fast, right? Usually, you wait months or years for a payoff like this. But this was instant delivery. Karen tried another tactic. Can't we just, handle this privately? Maybe he can show proof later, and we'll. Miller cut her off, still polite but firm. Ma'am, the system shows the policy is inactive. That means he's been uninsured for 2 months. Legally, we can't just overlook that. Kyle sighed heavily, still leaning against the car. Mom, it's not a big deal. I'll just pay the ticket. Miller turned to him slowly. Son, it's not just a ticket. You caused property damage while uninsured. That's a big deal. That's when Karen's eyes widened again, realization dawning like a bad horror movie twist. Wait. Are you saying we have to pay for his fence? Daniels nodded. Yes, ma'am. Since your son was driving without valid insurance, the responsibility for the property damage falls directly on him. Or, since he's living under your roof and the vehicle is registered at your address, on you as well. If the silence earlier was movie trailer level, this one was the full-blown Oscar-winning scene. Karen just stood there, mouth open, no words coming out. Kyle looked down at his shoes, mumbling something that sounded suspiciously like, I knew this was going to happen. I finally spoke up, maybe a little too cheerfully. Well, that's unfortunate. Fences aren't cheap these days, and mine was custom-built cedar. Karen whipped her head toward me, eyes blazing. Don't you dare get smug. You could have killed my son with that unsafe fence. Officer Daniels cleared his throat, barely hiding a smirk. Ma'am, the only unsafe thing here was your son's driving. Boom. Mic drop. Karen looked utterly deflated. You could see the gears turning in her mind, calculating the cost, the embarrassment, the HOA gossip that would ripple through the neighborhood by noon. Kyle, meanwhile, was on his phone, half pretending to text, but clearly trying to avoid eye contact with everyone. Daniels continued, because your son was uninsured at the time of the incident, the vehicle will need to be impounded until proof of insurance is provided and fines are paid. Karen's jaw dropped. Impounded? You can't take his car. That's ridiculous. He's traumatized. Miller looked sympathetic, but unmoved. Ma'am, that's the law. Driving uninsured is a major offense. The vehicle can't remain on public property in this condition. I swear, I nearly choked trying not to laugh. The mental image of Karen's precious son's BMW being hooked up to a tow truck was the kind of cosmic balance I didn't even know I needed. Karen turned to Kyle again. Kyle, tell them you'll fix it. Tell them we'll handle it. Kyle muttered, Mom, I don't even have the money. She looked like she just aged 10 years in 10 seconds. You what? That was it, I lost it. I actually turned away and pretended to cough to hide the laugh bubbling up. I mean, come on. This was gold. Officer Daniels handed Karen a slip of paper. Here's the case number. You'll need to contact your insurance provider to reinstate coverage and arrange for restitution to the property owner. Karen snatched the paper, glaring at me as if I personally invented the insurance system just to spite her. Don't look at me, I said, raising my hands. I'm just a guy with a broken fence. For a moment, even Officer Miller cracked a smile. Karen stood there, jaw clenched, shoulders tense, and muttered under her breath, This neighborhood is going downhill. Yeah, I said, still smiling, especially when people drive through it. She didn't respond, just huffed, spun on her heel, and stomped toward her house, like a general retreating from a lost battle. Kyle followed behind, muttering apologies to the officers. And me? I just stood there beside my destroyed fence, sipping my coffee, watching as the officers called in a tow truck. If satisfaction had a flavor, that morning it tasted like freshly brewed karma. The officer sighed, that heavy kind of sigh that says, I don't get paid enough for this nonsense. He looked from Kyle to Karen, then back down at his clipboard before delivering the line that would end all lines. Since you're uninsured and caused property damage, he said evenly, your vehicle will have to be towed. The words hung in the air like the final twist in a drama series. For a moment, nobody moved. Then, Karen gasped. It wasn't just a regular gasp either. It was the kind of gasp that deserved its own subtitle and echo effect. Towed. You can't tow my son's car. He's traumatized. Her voice shot up into that shrill, panicked tone she usually reserved for HOA meetings about non-compliant mailboxes. You'd think they were towing a family heirloom instead of her son's battered BMW. Officer Miller, completely unfazed, glanced down the street. Ma'am, the tow truck's already en route. They were nearby. Sure enough, not even 30 seconds later, the low rumble of a diesel engine rolled in from around the corner. A big, bright yellow tow truck pulled up, flashing lights and all. It was like the sound of justice itself rolling down the road. Karen spun around to face it, eyes wide with horror. No. You can't take it. That's his only car. The driver hopped out, a burly guy in a reflective vest with a calm, no-nonsense look. You could tell he'd done this dance 100 times. Afternoon, officers, he said casually. This the one? Officer Daniels nodded, gesturing toward the BMW that was now listing slightly to one side, like a wounded animal. Yep, that's the one. Karen rushed in front of it, arms spread like she was protecting her child from danger. You're not taking it. My son's been through enough. The tow driver didn't even blink. Ma'am, please step aside. I've got orders from law enforcement. Kyle, meanwhile, stood there awkwardly, hands stuffed into his hoodie pockets, avoiding eye contact with everyone. You could tell he was mentally checking out of the whole situation, that kind of quiet acceptance that only comes when you realize you've completely lost control. I stood there a few feet away, arms crossed, doing everything I could not to burst out laughing. I mean, come on. Karma had just pulled up with a winch and a flashing light bar. The driver lowered the hook, metal clanking against the asphalt, and started securing the BMW. Karen kept pacing back and forth, muttering things like, this is outrageous, and you'll regret this, under her breath. At one point, she turned to me, face redder than a stop sign. You think this is funny, don't you? I shrugged, smiling just enough to drive her insane. A little bit, yeah. Her mouth dropped open. You will be hearing from the HOA, she snapped, pointing a trembling finger at me like she was summoning suburban justice. Before I could even respond, Officer Daniels stepped in, his tone calm but firm. Ma'am, the HOA doesn't handle traffic violations or property damage. He's within his rights to seek compensation. Boom. The perfect line, delivered with the authority of someone who had absolutely no patience left for nonsense. Karen froze for a second, her righteous fury short-circuiting. She opened her mouth, then closed it again, clearly struggling to process the fact that her precious HOA badge carried exactly 0 weight here. Meanwhile, the tow truck driver was already cranking up the winch. The BMW's front end lifted off the ground with a groan, metal scraping against metal. Kyle groaned too, a long, dramatic sound like the car itself was his last shred of dignity being dragged away. Karen turned back toward the officers one last time. You people are unbelievable. He's a good kid. This neighborhood is supposed to be safe for families. Officer Miller just nodded. It is, ma'am. Safer when people don't drive uninsured into other people's fences. Even the tow driver cracked a grin at that one. The BMW was fully loaded onto the flatbed now, straps secured tight. The driver climbed into the cab, gave a polite little wave to the officers, and then, just like that, it was gone. The sound of that tow truck rumbling down the street might as well have been the sweet song of poetic justice. Karen stood there for a moment, watching the car disappear around the corner like her entire reputation was being hauled away with it. Then, with one final huff, she spun around, grabbed Kyle by the arm, and stormed off toward their house. Her slippers slapped against the pavement, her robe flapping in the wind like a defeated flag. Kyle didn't say a word. He just shuffled along behind her, shoulders hunched, looking like a kid grounded for eternity. The officers finished up their notes, handed me a copy of the incident report, and gave me a polite nod. "We'll file this officially," Daniels said. "You'll have a case number if you want to submit a claim for the fence." "Thank you, officers," I said, trying to keep a straight face, but failing miserably. "You've made my morning." They chuckled, then headed back to their cruiser. As the sound of the tow truck faded into the distance, I looked at the mess that used to be my fence, the splintered boards, the deep tire marks, the small pile of debris that used to be my weekend project. But somehow, I didn't feel frustrated anymore. I felt satisfied, because in that moment, standing there on my front lawn in my slippers, watching the universe balance the scales in real time, I realized something beautiful. Sometimes karma doesn't knock. Sometimes it rolls in with flashing lights, a hydraulic winch, and a clipboard full of justice. And that morning, justice had officially been served curbside. A week later, I had my fence replaced, this time even sturdier than before. Karen tried to find me through the HOA for non-standard materials, but I had already called the city and confirmed it was 100% compliant. In fact, the city inspector even mentioned that the HOA had no jurisdiction over fence materials unless specifically outlined in the original neighborhood charter, which it wasn't. So not only did Karen lose that battle, but she also got fined by the city for having an unregistered vehicle in her driveway for 2 weeks before they fixed the insurance issue. As for me, I got my fence fixed, a great story to tell, and the satisfaction of watching karma play out perfectly. And every time I see Kyle drive by now, at 10 miles an hour, like a cautious old man, I just smile and wave. Because sometimes, the universe doesn't need you to lift a finger. It just takes care of Karen's all by itself.